Emmanuel Macron, take heed across the Alps, a lesson in what happens when you don't deliver the goods. Just 4 years ago, Italy elected another young reformer, but when ballots are counted next Sunday night, the center-left's Matteo Renzi could be all washed up at the age of 43. We'll see why and ask about an electorate squeezed by austerity, fed up with corruption and nervous about immigration. The populist backlash is palpable. The bad news for voters in Italy's general election, writes the Wall Street Journal, is there will be a winner. That may or may not be true, by the way. Luca Di Maio, the young fresh face representing Beppe Grillo's anti-establishment five-star movement, could finish tops despite his party's rejection of alliances, which could then set the stage for a hung parliament. That said, there is one familiar face who's more than ready to step in. Yes, nearly a quarter century after he first led Italy, Silvio Berlusconi is raring to return, even if the now 81-year-old conservative would have to find a caretaker for a year. Yes, Berlusconi still barred from holding office over a tax fraud conviction. So what do the Italians want from this election? And are they drifting away from Europe? If so, why? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if what's on offer at the ballot is change Italy can believe in. With us from Rome, Chiara Albanese, journalist with Bloomberg News. Thank you for being with us.
A pleasure. Good evening.
From Brussels, we'll be joined by Elly Schlein, member of the European Parliament from the left-wing Possibile party, and also in the European capital, Marco Gambacci, political analyst with the European Post, contributor to the newspaper Il Giornale. Thanks for being with us again here on the show.
Good evening from a freezing Brussels.
Freezing in Paris as well. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. By the way, there's no polling allowed in Italy inside of the final 2 weeks of the campaign. So the map of Italy we can show you now, well, it dates back to February the 16th. Now, the parts you see in red, they represent districts favorable to Matteo Renzi's Democratic Party. The blue is the right-wing coalition that stretches from Berlusconi's party to the anti-immigrant Northern League. And in yellow is the five-star movement. Let me begin with you, Chiara Albanese. What do you make of right now? I know that you co-authored an article on how people are getting around this ban on polling. Do we have an idea on whether or not stuff has shifted in the last 2 weeks?
Good evening, everyone. We cannot talk about polls in the last couple of weeks, but we can just look back at what the polls were showing before the blackout period started. And what they were showing was a country that is pretty much divided in equal parts into three. A third going to the right coalition, a third going to the left, and a third going to populist five-star movement, which is the party founded by Beppe Grillo a few years back, and what Italians would vote calling for a change. It's right that there were a lot of ways in which Italians were trying to go around the polling ban. They tried horse races, they tried weather forecasts, they even tried the website utrend.it, even tried to basically have a conclave in which they were electing cardinals, so using cardinal names as politicians. Though this year, this is not happening as much as in the past because the communication authority is going to enforce the ban pretty seriously. They sent a reminder in the last weeks. So
because here in France, we complain about 48 hours of no polling before an election. It's 2 weeks. That's got to be tough.
That's true. At the same time, it kind of feels, in a way, more relaxing. You can just focus on your ideas. You can talk with friends, with colleagues, with family about it. And in a way, the polls that have been running on and going on for months have been showing a trend that was pretty much consistent. So I think the polling ban has not felt so harshly as it was in the past. And also, in a way, polls have shown to be a bit unreliable in other elections. We can clearly think about Brexit. We can think about Trump. So people are really looking forward to have the first projections during the night rather than the polls and the first exit polls.
What kind of a campaign has it been?
It's been a campaign full of promises and full of new faces as well. For example, Di Maio, which would be the candidate for the 5-star, if elected, would be the youngest prime minister that Italy would have ever, is just 31. And on the center-right, we don't even have a name. While we've seen Berlusconi, of course, campaigning and talking about potential names, we don't know who would take the lead if the center-right would win a majority. So it's been a very mixed campaign in terms of like the people that have been at the forefront of it.
A very strange campaign. Marco Gambacci, one of the peculiarities of this campaign has been there was no televised debate. What does that tell you?
Well, I think that the campaign was a very low-level electoral campaign, a lot of promises without justifying how they would cover all the expenses, the new expenses that this would provoke. So there was only one big pillar in this electoral campaign. It was migration. There was the pro-migration party, the against migration party, the one in the middle, but foreign policy was not discussed at all, even discussing about migration. There was no a proper discussion about the future of Europe, despite one little party led by Emma Bonino. So I'm very fed up and sad about this electoral campaign. I was expecting some much more intensive electoral campaign under intellectual point of view. Instead, I saw an intensive from a violent point of view. We have seen a lot of clashes between the anti-fascist movement and the police. We have seen the spread of the fear of a sort of new fascism in Italy, which I think is very unlikely. So it was a very, I would say, quite almost a boring campaign because not a lot of interesting topic have been touched.
It's amazing how fickle the electorate is, because just think back to 2016 when Matteo Renzi announced that he was having this referendum to change the constitution. He was the rising star of Europe. Is he washed up?
Yeah, I think that Matteo Renzi, this is my personal point of view, of course, but I think was a bluff. Was a very nice speaker, was very nice to stay in opposition, even at the opposition of his own party. But when he was called to run Italy, he did something quite well. But after he failed the referendum strategy, he even promised to quit with politics if he would have lost the referendum, and he didn't quit, and he's running again for a prime minister position. So I think that even the Italians really feel that this, and also the last polls before the blackout, they were saying that there was a free fall in the polls for the Partito Democratico. So I think that in this moment, to run Italy with this new electoral law, in Italy, to run Italy, you have to get the 40% of votes. So this means that the only coalition that can reach the 40% is the center-right coalition. Berlusconi with Forza Italia, Matteo Salvini with the Lega North, and Giorgia Meloni with Brothers of Italy, Fratelli d'Italia. And this is the big question mark, because if they will reach the 40%, they will have to select the prime minister, the name that they will have to put forward, the President of the Republic, to be appointed as President of the Council. If the center-right coalition will not reach the 40%, this is another big question mark. What is going on? Is Berlusconi, will Berlusconi speak again with Matteo Renzi to form a grosse coalition?
Yeah, that's the question. Will there be a grand coalition? Berlusconi so far saying no. Of course, that could all change. At 81, he's making fewer campaign appearances, wearing a little bit more makeup. Still plenty of bravado, like when he takes aim at the Five-Star Movement, which has said it doesn't want to take part in any coalition.
I decided to return to politics 3 months ago because, as in 1994, I felt the duty to prevent an undemocratic party, a dangerous sect like the Five-Star Movement, from coming to power.
Well, we can welcome now Elie Schlein, member of the European Parliament from the left-wing Possibile party, former member of Matteo Renzi's Democratic Party. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you. It's a pleasure of being here.
The question everyone in France is asking is, how come Silvio Berlusconi is back?
Well, it's a very difficult question. He never went away because in 2000, let's say, 2014, basically, he was brought back in the middle of the scene, the political scene, by Matteo Renzi himself when they struck a deal, the so-called Patto del Nazareno, in which they decided together the electoral reform and the constitutional reform that then was not passed. You remember the referendum last year in 2016, actually, that went down. So he never really left the political scene. He left the government at some point, but he was always behind as a director of some movements in the right. Let's say, if the real question is how come Matteo Renzi's party has gone down from 40% that he got at the last European election to the 22% of the recent polls. And yeah, that's a good question to pose.
And what's your answer to that?
And let me say, well, my answer, which is also the reason why many of us were forced to leave the Democratic Party, is that the last governments of center-left pushed forward right-wing policies in terms of the job reform, the school reform, the environmental reform, but also the constitutional and electoral reform. So if you, let's say, take the language and the proposal of the right wing by, let's say, thinking that you will take also the votes that before went to the right wing, it's a terrible mistake, because the only result that you will have, and it is clearly shown also in other European elections, the only result is to strengthen the right wing. And that's the reason, I think, why the right-wing coalition is now leading the polls with 34 to 36%. So that's the point. And we have a third actor, as you know, the Five-Star Movement, which is also around 30% in the last polls, that is not willing to discuss, let's say, coalition for a government after the election. So it's really difficult to tell for us now what is going on after the election of Sunday. Possible scenarios, we will see if the right-wing coalition will actually have alone, but I really doubt. And of course, I hope it doesn't happen, because I'm, of course, campaigning for the left, Liberi Uguali party. But if the right-wing coalition will have enough seats to form a majority, that is an option. The other option is, looking at the polls today, a grand coalition government between Forza Italia and Berlusconi and the Partito Democratico, but still they would have to find 40 to 50 other MPs, and I honestly don't know where they could find them. But this is the result, let me say, and stress out, of a terrible electoral law that was passed after many attempts of rewriting it in an unconstitutional way. The last electoral law was passed very recently by Partito Democratico, Forza Italia and Lega Nord in the attempt to weaken the Five-Star Movement, and it's only the Partito Democratico and its allies that were weakened by this law.
Chiara Albanese, what's your analysis on how Italians view this electoral law and the election that's coming up?
Well, it's a difficult electoral law. We have
Chiara Albanese.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'll say a couple of things. The first one is that Italians want change, and it's very tough, as previous elections show, but just in general trends, for parties that have been in government to be reconfirmed. It's tough to make reforms in Italy. It's easy for Italians to say, I want to change because I want my country and its issues to get better. So it's very easy to choose another party. And that's also one of the reasons why a lot of support is going, according to the previous polls, to the right and to the 5-star. So Italians definitely want to change, want reform, want some improvement. Of course, Italy still has...
It's a change of faces they want, Chiara. You heard Marco Gambacci say that they haven't even discussed Europe much during this election campaign. Is it just that they want Renzi out and they want someone new, or is it about issues?
I think it's more about issues. It's about employment, in particular in the south of Italy. Unemployment among young people is very high. There is a strong backlash against the pension reform that was passed by the Renzi government, which increased the age at which people can retire in Italy. So people want answers to their very own personal issues: less taxes, more employment, and the ability to retire earlier. And these are all things that are promised by all parties, of course, but it's easier to believe that are going to be implemented by parties that have not been in the government last, which means the center-right and the 5-star. That's the first thing. Yeah, that's the thing that Italians want.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking ahead to elections Sunday in Italy that could have repercussions across Europe. What with the Italians maybe ready for a populist turn, or to bring back Silvio Berlusconi, bolstered in a coalition by the far right. With us to talk about it from Rome, Chiara Albanese, journalist with Bloomberg News. From Brussels, Ellie Schlein, member of the European Parliament from the left-wing Possibile party. And also in Brussels, Marco Gambacci, a contributor to Il Giornale, political analyst with the European Post. Marco, who was talking in part one of our discussion about how there has been violence in this campaign. Italy was shocked earlier this month when a 28-year-old Northern League member shot and wounded 6 immigrants in the central Italian town of Macerata. That prompted a mass demonstration there. There have been also violent clashes between far-right and anti-fascist militants in several cities. That's even led the finance minister, Pier Carlo Padoan, to tell newspaper La Stampa that the political parties underestimate the seriousness of the urban violence. Padoan talking of a mood reminiscent of the 1970s. Marco Gambacci, those were known as the years of lead, as in lead bullets. Is it like the 1970s in Italy?
No, it's not. We have to be very clear on that. And I think that partially the fault is also on the media side. They spread the fear of the return of fascism. They spread a lot of, let's say, very alarming news. And in these cases, especially when the unemployment is very high, we are not out of the economic crisis yet. I think that a lot of people overreacted. And I saw extreme right movement overreacting, as well as extreme left movement overreacting. There was a very sad images of Italy yesterday when a professor, I'm saying a teacher at the school, she started to scream against the police, and she screamed against them, yelling at them, saying that they have to die. So for me, having the image of a teacher, a professor at the Italian school, who is supposed to teach the matters to the school, to the children, listening her to scream against the Italian police make me really crazy and make me very sad about this electoral campaign and how these images have been shown in the Italian, also in the Italian media. But said that we are not back during the Red Brigade time. I'm really confident after this very tense moment during the electoral campaign, the situation will be much more calmer.
It is nonetheless the same sort of ugliness that we sometimes witnessed during the Brexit campaign, where once again immigration really polarizes the electorate?
Yeah. Migration polarized the election. Migration polarized all the electoral campaign almost. And even in this case, when the main pillar of the electoral campaign is one topic, is migration, I didn't see a deep discussion about migration. I didn't see a deep discussion about what the migration is provoked by. I didn't see a deep discussion about foreign policy and how foreign policy can stop the migrants' fluxes. I didn't see how to change the policy towards migration. I just listened people saying, I want to stop migration and we have to welcome refugees without a deep analysis on this. And this is very, honestly, is very sad.
Elie Schlein, you agree?
No, I don't, obviously, because I'm part of maybe the unique party that is going to run, that is running for the election of Sunday, that has a comprehensive response to the matter of migration that goes on the local level in the direction of a widespread model of welcoming refugees. Let's not forget that in these years we have seen mafia and organized crime, let's say, taking a role in the welcoming of refugees and migrants. And to avoid that, it is needed to have the full involvement of the municipalities and to have transparency and controls that were lacking in these years. On the national level, we have a law, like many other EU countries, that does not allow any kind of regular migration also for those who are seeking for a better opportunity in our countries. It means that we have to rewrite these very hypocritical migration policies. And at the European level, I am rapporteur for my group, the SD, on the Dublin regulation reform. And I'm astonished because in the Italian debate towards election, nobody is speaking about the very important reform that was approved a couple of months ago. It is, just to explain, let's say the Dublin regulation is the one that decides which member state is responsible for examining every and each asylum request presented in the EU. And what the Parliament is pushing for is a European solution that does not leave Italy and Greece alone. I agree with the reporter there on the fact that nobody is really speaking about this, but I would say except from us, because we have this without demagogy, without leaving only the debate on how many people have come to Italy, but providing with clear answers. It's true that the campaign is being very aggressive. I cannot recall anything like that before. It's aggressive. We've seen many physical aggression and violence, especially from the far-right extremists, and the episode of Macerata, you remember, with a white supremacist
also far left, also very far left,
migrants
against
in the
police.
streets. You cannot, I'm sorry, but you cannot put on the same level. The fascists should not even be able to run for election in a country where the constitution says clearly that fascist movement should be removed, should be not there. So I will not put them on the same level.
So you are justifying the far left who are doing the clash against the police?
No, fortunately, I'm part of those at the left that do not want to see and to support any kind of violence. I'm just saying that in a democratic country, it is unacceptable to have fascists that have the photos together with Pribke running for the election, because this is what is happening in our country today. We should face it and remind ourselves that the Constitution is pretty clear about the fact that fascists should not run in the democratic election. The country is suffering. The fear of the people should not be minimalized.
Probably
Casa
Pound, the party which the MEP is talking about, will get the 0.4%. So.
Sorry, I am not interrupting you. I wish not to be interrupted as well. I'm talking about the fact that the country is suffering because immigration has been always the best, let's say, weapon of mass distraction, not destruction, because it is used and waved to distract from the real problems of the fact that the last governments have failed with their political, let's say, economic and social choices to address the real problem of the rising inequalities in our country, the rising poverty. I mean, the job reform, the unemployment of young people. We know that people feel insecure, but they have some reason to do it, and the fault is not to be put on the last people that are arriving and on immigrants, because it's about political choices that were mistakes in this year.
Let me bring in Chiara Albanese on this. Chiara, how has the mood changed since the last time in 2014 Italians went to the polls?
Some things in Italy change and some things never. The thing that has not changed is Italians seeking for new faces, new ideas, the hope that things are gonna improve for them. And I have to agree on the issues here, because I think that what Italians feel most in this election is the lack of security in terms of jobs, in terms of pensions, in terms of healthcare. And immigration is in a way used as a distraction here on how to address those issues with policies. Because if you go to most Italians, especially young ones, their questions are about how do we get a job, how can I build a family, how do I get a mortgage, how do I get the security.
And are those young Italians gonna vote?
They're gonna vote. Who they're gonna vote? That's a good question. I do think that their vote is going to be spread between the three parties. Each of them is seeking the same solution in a different direction. Some of them are hoping, are going to vote left, hoping that what has been started by the Gentiloni government, that has definitely been addressing some of those issues in the last year, is going to continue. Some of them are hoping that the center-right is going to be able to address those changes with its policies. And some of them are going to vote five-star with the hope that the big kind of, the most controversial party is going to bring a small revolution, which is going to solve those issues.
All right, and of course, there's another party which is important to Silvio Berlusconi, and that is the Northern League, which tacks to the far right. Their leader insists he's all for welcoming immigrants, so long as they put Italy first. And when it comes to the EU, Matteo Salvini's position is clear.
These European rules massacre our farmers and our fishermen and force us to import millions of tons of Tunisian oil, Moroccan oranges, Cambodian rice, Canadian wheat, or fish from Turkey. I will either change these European rules or I will rip them up. Because our children need to eat the fruits of our land and our sea.
How much does that resonate, Chiara Albanese?
Both the Northern League and so Salvini and the Five-Star Movement, so Beppe Grillo, have had at the core of their agenda a strong anti-European and anti-EU vision. I have to say that both sides have softened a bit their stance. Five-Star, for example, wanted to try and get Italy out of the euro, introducing a new currency. Salvini is just saying, let's give back to Italians what belongs to Italians. Clearly, their views remain in this campaign, and they're going to gather some of the votes based on these views. But also, they have realized that to be part of a coalition, especially for Northern League, to be part of a coalition that might have the possibility to compose a government, they have to soften this stance. So I don't think that their European or anti-European views are going to be a determinant in getting them to power or not.
Marco Gambacci, you agree?
I very much agree. It's very important what Chiara Albanese said, that the two right-wing parties in the center-right coalition of Fratelli d'Italia and Lega North, they soften their vision on Europe. And if we are talking also about the premiership in the center-right, Berlusconi put out the name of Antonio Tajani, the current president of the European Parliament, and he's a pro-European politician. He's a man of honor, a gentleman of politics. And even in this case, the European Union will not be worried to have an anti-European government in Italy, because if the centre-right will win and Tajani will be appointed the Prime Minister, they will have a friend in Rome, since Antonio Tajani was a European Commissioner and now is President of the European Parliament. And if there will be a grosse coalition between Forza Italia and Partito Democratico, again, we will have all the name of Antonio Tajani or again Paolo Gentiloni, and the two men are pro-European politicians. So I think that the real winner is Europe, because if this electoral campaign brought a lot of violence on one side, for sure a lot of parties softened their vision towards the European Union, and they are asking not anymore to leave the euro or to leave the European Union, but they ask the European Union to do much more to help Italy, especially in the migrant crisis.
Is there in that respect, Marco, is there a,
etc., etc.?
Is there a Marine Le Pen effect? She got battered in the runoff of the French presidential election precisely because she was talking about leaving the euro, and that scared away elder voters.
I think that you point out something very, very interesting. We can call it Marine Le Pen effect, or I don't know. But it has happened something very similar. They understood that Marine Le Pen, if she was continuing to scream out against the European Union, this would not give the security to the voters. So they decided to soften their views. And this is a positive aspect in this electoral campaign.
All right, so we have the possibility of a coalition led by Silvio Berlusconi, half a century younger than him, half a century younger. The Five Star Movement's new standard bearer, 31-year-old Luigi Di Maio. And despite disillusion with the party's leadership at the local level where they've governed in cities like Rome, Parma, Turin, the movement, though, still energizing voters.
I always voted for the right, and this is the first time I'll vote for this young man. I trust him.
We think he is the right person to govern us.
Honestly, before I had stopped voting, but with the Five Star Movement, I feel a passion for politics again, a motivation to fight the system.
Elie Schlein, how do you explain this phenomenon?
The Five Star Movement? Well, we had for 20 years basically always the same political class. I'm part of a generation that was actually quite fed up with the political class at the right and at the left. And the point is, in 2013, they came out of the blue and they got 26% of voters that were dissatisfied, let's say, disillusioned with Italian politics. After 5 years, we have to say the government of Letta, then Renzi, then Gentiloni, failed to address the major problem of rising inequalities, as I said. So the country today, at least many citizens, do not feel better than 5 years ago. That's why, despite the scandals that have involved the Five Star Movement, despite the fact that where they are, the government, like Rome, it's a complete disaster, if you ask me, or also in other let's say, smaller municipalities, despite all of this, there is still reason for the Italian citizen to be very angry at the political class because it didn't deliver answers to their insecurity that we were just discussing. That's the main reason why. At the same time, I think the Five Star Movement has a problem of ambiguity in its position on the jobs, for example, on civil rights, on migration as well. Luigi Di Maio pushed the movement farther to the right. Because, you know, at the beginning, Beppe Grillo was able, with this, let's say, discourse, anti-corruption of the political class, to get together electors from the disillusioned electors from the center-right and from the center-left as well. So now it's difficult because Luigi Di Maio is clearly leaning towards migration policies of the right wing. So it's less ambiguous maybe, but at the same time, there is a strong will to change in some people. Many of the voters that voted for Five-Star Movement in 2013, I'm pretty sure are not going to vote for them anymore. But there are others, for example, that were disappointed by the Grand Coalition governments of this year. So they are still there, and they are not paying the scandals because who was at the government was simply doing worse in these years. That's why I think they are still at 30% in the polls. At the same time, as I said, it's a very bad campaign, very aggressive, not easy to make, but I think the number one issues are, as I said, fighting to inequalities, poverty, and relaunching the economy. And I'm really surprised that nobody is talking about the real enemies. For example, the multinational companies that are doing tax evasion and tax avoidance that is costing huge amounts of money, not only to Italy, but the whole European Union. I would want to see the anti-Europeans, because it's true what Marco and Chiara were saying. I agree with that. They have softened the position of Europe, but I'm less optimistic on the fact that once at the government, the matter would still come out if they manage to go at the government, which I hope not, of course, because I hope that we will go towards another kind of government, which also entails the left. Of course, I wouldn't be here otherwise. But I have to say, I'm not sure that they're gonna solve this issue on Europe, and I want to ask the anti-European, how do they think to, what do they think to do to convince Ireland, Malta, Luxembourg, and the other European member states to stop, let's say, facilitating tax avoidance and tax dodging in general, because it costs to the European Union, it is estimated around 1,000 million euros. It means a trillion euros every year.
Very briefly, Chiara Albanese, Italy's had, what is it, 65 governments in 70 years. Every time they try a reform to make the system more stable, it somehow doesn't quite get there. What will then be like under the next government?
Yeah, that's a quite good question, because we have avoided to address the issue that another scenario that could come up out of this election could be another election if no one will be able to actually form a stable government. Is not completely improbable that in a year's time we're going to be sitting here talking about the same issues again, and Italy will be forming government 66. So it's tough. It's tough in such a country which is divided on like three legs to agree on a reform that pleases everyone. Most definitely the current electoral law had the idea, or set off with a plan to try and create more stability. As things are looking at the moment, we could end up in another long period of uncertainty.
And we'll be covering that long period of uncertainty. I want to thank you, Chiara Albanese, for being with us from Rome. I want to thank Marco Gambacci and Ellie Schlein for being with us from Brussels. Stay with us, because Media Watch is next. And we say hello to James Creedon.
Francois.
We heard there corruption, jobs, and immigration, the three big hot button
Certainly,
issues.
I think foreign reporting looking at the Italian election has really sort of zeroed in on immigration as the hot button issue, if you like. I'll just take a look at two reports. First off, in the New York Times, Gaia Pianigiani, I hope that's correctly pronounced. Now, he went back, or she went back, to her home village called Castellina. This is in the Chianti region. Oh. Now, when
worst places to visit.
Absolutely. Now, when she grew up there, only one of her classmates was from somewhere else, a boy who arrived from Grosseto, roughly 60 miles away. So even that somewhere else was pretty local. And more than half of the 23 second graders today have parents from Afghanistan, Albania, Bosnia, Macedonia, Morocco, Pakistan or Tunisia. 5 were born in their family's country of origin. So this is the new Italy, says Gaia Pianigiani. And I was part of a different migration, she says, the migration outward for those who have university degrees. The flood of Italians in their 20s, 30s and 40s who have earned college degrees and left their villages or small towns where job options are limited. So many Italians have, now despite all of that, she speaks about the fact how in Tuscany, it's a leftist stronghold for decades, and many Italians have opened their homes to migrants, but that picture is not quite as tranquil elsewhere. And our own Benjamin Dodman actually has been in Italy reporting on the election. He's talking about a boon for the far right, how the migrant crisis has hijacked Italy's election.
What our panel was saying as well.
Totally. And he went to a place called Fermo, again, which is a centrist kind of bastion usually. But even here, he spoke to one driver who said, we're living in a racist state, racist against Italians. And that is straight out of the talking points, if you like, of the Liga. And their leader, Matteo Salvini, told supporters at a recent rally in Milan that he was accusing Italy's centre-left government of racism against its own people. He said, I'm sick of seeing immigrants in hotels and Italians sleeping in cars. Now, even in Fermo, in fact, which is, as I said, a centrist area, very usually hospitable to foreigners, about 18 months ago, a 36-year-old Nigerian asylum seeker, Emmanuel Namdi, died of injuries after a scuffle when a local man abused his wife. In any case, the scuffle led to violence, and there was even small explosive devices detonated outside a local parish building. So, as one observer said there, if such violence could happen here in a mild and tranquil region, it means the cracks in our social fabric are deeper than we thought. Now, Benjamin Dodman mentioned one final point on this that I think was quite interesting. Official figures show a steady decline in crime in recent years, yet a report by the European Observatory of Security suggested a possible link between perceptions that crime is limited to immigration rather, and the blanket coverage, in fact, in Italy's main televised news programmes on crime-related stories, and apparently that dwarfs the issue in a lot of other European countries.
Yeah, that's a similar story in many places. Just a word before we go about fake news. Any fake news in this campaign, James?
A lot of fake news, and indeed TheAtlantic.com has been looking at that. There was one explosive story about a 9-year-old Muslim girl who was hospitalised after being sexually assaulted by her 35-year-old husband in the northeastern city of Padua. Totally fake, and this sort of stuff is really polluting the Italian election. There have been efforts to rope Facebook into an effort to limit that online, and it's actually more extensive in Italy than anywhere. Not much time to go into that, but there is an effort to combat it.
All right, many thanks for that, James Creedon. Thank you for joining us here. I want to thank our panel. More to come here on France 24.